Yom HaZicharon is, of course, a day in which we think and we identify and we thank, express our gratitude to those who gave up their lives in the underground, Haganah, Lechi, against the Brits, those who fought the battles, those who died in freakish accidents in army training. Cousin of mine fits that category. Not only soldiers that died in battle, but even Jews who gave up their lives, Harugei Malchut as we call them, in acts of terrorism. The state of Israel is a democratic, secular state at this point. We pray and we hope and we long for the day when halakha will become the law of the land. And frankly, I think we're making great progress. There's a movement in Israel called HaMishpat HaIvri. And in general, religious Jews are trying to make the population at large, the Jewish people in the state of Israel, aware and sensitive to the fact that the halakha, the ancient halakha of the Torah, is as relevant today as it was when it was given. The principles therein will address every issue, every life situation that comes up in modern society. If I could turn the clock back to the situation in Uganda, it's a very fascinating piece of history, the fact that the Prime Minister, then Yitzhak Rabin, actually turned to the Rabbanut to ask the rabbis what their halachic opinion would be in terms of the question of sending Israeli soldiers in to free over 100 Jewish hostages in Uganda. I'm not going to claim here that the halachic psak in that case was the determining factor, but there's no question that the state of Israel, the cabinet, felt very comfortable, even supported by the fact that the conclusion of the Israeli chief rabbinate was the same as that of the Israeli government. So in that particular episode, there was an overlap between the policy of the Israeli government and the halakha. But of course, all of those who are here today and have lived through even part of the 62 years in the state of Israel have experienced, have felt, have read, have identified with the situation of hostages, Jewish hostages. I remember in my life the episode of Ma'alot. I mean, you could still, many of you may remember, we could hear the shots as they were broadcast around the world. Arab terrorists who take over a bus, a school, a group of soldiers, an individual citizen, with demands to free 50, 100, 1,000 terrorists from Israeli prisons. And the policy of the state of Israel has been, we do not negotiate with terrorists. That policy itself has softened up over the years. It's not exactly as absolute as it once was. And the question I'd like to address this morning is, what does our ancient tradition of halakha have to say addressing this very, very life and death issue of freeing terrorists for the sake of saving hostages? On the one hand, to save Jewish lives, v'chai b'hem, the mitzvah of hatzalat nefesh, of pikuach nefesh, has the paramount mitzvah. The Gemara tells us, the Mishnah tells us, he who saves one life is tantamount to have saved the entire world. Lama nivra adam yechidi. Man was created singular, one individual man, to tell us that he's shakul, he weighs like the entire world. And yet on the other hand, in order to go ahead and save these hostages, to free terrorists from jails, the assumption, the premise I'm working with, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, is that those terrorists have not undergone a tremendous process of introspection and repentance They have not become great friends of the state of Israel, the Jewish people. Maybe we should develop methods of doing so. I don't know what psychiatrists would help us with various methods of that. We'd have to make them into one flew of the cuckoo's nest, if you know what I mean. But as far as they're concerned, they're coming back to haunt us and to hound us and to kill us, men, women, and children. And so for the sake of saving Jewish hostages, to free terrorists from prisons means to put more Jews exposed to danger. So, does one thing override the other? Where do we make the calculation? And the halacha works with principles. There are many other issues that are involved with negotiating with terrorists. You start freeing terrorists from jails, what does it mean? How does it entice the terrorists to come back for more? And it's an ongoing situation. In addition, what is the halachic status of our Jewish battle against terrorism? Is it to be halachically defined and subsumed under the mitzvah of milchama, of fighting battle, in which case for sure we have to go in there and kill the terrorists at no matter what cost? Or should we just view it under the categories of pikuach nefesh, saving, exposing others to danger, and weighing all those possibilities? In addition, there's another halakhic consideration that has to be taken into our thoughts. And that is, if we go ahead and deal with the terrorists, are we, in effect, encouraging terrorism? Are we recognizing the terrorists? And what implications does that have? So, what we're going to try to do in the next few minutes, obviously we cannot exhaust in a very comprehensive way this topic. I'm trying to concentrate here, but it's a challenge. I get very distracted by noise, but I'll manage. Yeah. What we're going to try to do is look at least some of the source material in Chazal and see perhaps, at least from this particular perspective, what the halakha would dictate, in the hope that eventually these laws will be studied by anyone who makes policy in the state of Israel. We will not address the question of, for example, a war against terrorism, whether it comes halakhically under the status of milchama. That's a topic that's a very hot one and very sensitive topic. But rather we're going to focus our attention and limit it to the question of pikuach nefesh. Okay. We're going to start with the Tosefta in Trumos. For those of you who have the page, it's the actual first Hebrew source on the page. I do not have a translation of Tosefta, so we'll try to do the best we can. Why is this Tosefta in Trumos? Because Truma is something that we have to protect the sanctity of. And it's interesting that sometimes our enemies want to undermine that sanctity. And they come to us and force us to defile that which is holy and sanctified, like Truma. At the same time, the sanctity of tzniut, of Jewish modesty, in the case in which our enemies come and attack and want to vilify and contaminate Jewish women, which was mentioned by Rav Itamar before in the case in Gittin, and a third piece of the Tosefta, which is closest to our discussion, that is, if they come and say, let us destroy a Jew, choose a Jew, we'll destroy him. If not, we'll raise the entire city to the ground. And logic might dictate that for the sake of saving the many, we might be tempted to forfeit the individual. Give up one individual for the sake of the city. That seems logical in and of itself. And yet the Tosefta establishes, say, Ashal b'nei Adam, she'omru lehem goyim, tnu lanu echad mikem, v'nargeu v'im lav, harei anu hargim et kulam, yehargu kulam, they should all die. We are not permitted, even for the sake of saving the many, to choose an individual Jew to die, to sacrifice him for the sake of the entire city. Lest you say, well, this is a very nice abstract principle based on a Tosefta, but who says that the Tosefta expresses the halachic code and yet the Rambam? Take a look in your next source. The Rambam says in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, and we're going to skip the first case in the Rambam. In the second case on line 2, V'cheinim omrlem ovdei kochavim tnu lanu echad mikem v'nargeu v'im lav naro kulchem yehargu kulam v'al yimsu lem nefesh achas miyisrael. Word for word the Tosefta, because of Mishnah on the spot points out that the source for the Rambam is the Tosefta. So this is halachic principle. And let's try to analyze this. Do we apply the principle of v'chai b'hem to save a life when someone else will perish? Do we make calculations? And do we justify giving up one life for the sake of others? The famous Gemara in Pesachim says, and it appears also in other Masechtas, that if a non-Jew says to you, kill a Jew, this particular Jew, and if not, I'll kill you. So, can I apply the principle of v'chai b'hem? You shall live by the Torah and not die, and commit murder. Well, what do you say? No, what about v'chai b'hem? You see, in the case of avodah zarah, of idol worship, the Torah says b'chol nafshecha, that you have to give up your life rather than violate avodah zarah. So the law, the prohibition against idol worship, cannot be overridden even for the sake of a chayvah, of saving life. Other than that, I don't know of any passage in the Torah with regard to any other than the 612 mitzvot that says you cannot override this one, whatever it might be of the 612, even for the sake of v'chai b'hem. Rather, the overriding principle is v'chai b'hem. Live by them. And it applies to 612. The only case is b'chol nafshecha with regard to avat Hashem, with regard to avodah zarah, idol worship. I can't worship an idol to save my own life. But what about lo tirtzach? Can I violate murder, shfichut damim, for the sake of saving my life? Rabbi, why not?
No.
You don't agree with me?
No, you've got the 3 mitzvahs that you cannot violate.
Right. But I'm challenging you to tell me, where does it say that in the Torah? And the truth of the matter, it doesn't say it in the Torah. Right. So how do we know the v'chai b'hem is suspended? Right. So the Sanhedrin Ayin Dalet. Good. What's it called? Help me out here, Rabbi. Come on. My chazis. You remember my chazis? Excellent. How do we know that your blood is redder than his? Good. So what's happening over here? What's happening is we're going to switch one life for the other. Right? You want to kill him to save yourself. So Reuben's going to die, and you, Shimon, are going to survive. So the Gemara says, well, logically, the principle of v'chai b'hem should apply. V'chai b'hem applies to 612, does it not? There's no verse that says lo tirtzach shfichut damim is not subject to the law of v'chai b'hem, of saving your life, so therefore violate. Murder for the sake of saving your life. Commit murder to save your life. That's the Gemara's principle. And the Gemara says no. We can't do it. Why not? Because of another piece of logic, another rule, another principle we're not welcome. And that principle says that to switch one life for the other, well, which life is more important in the eyes of God? We cannot make that decision. And therefore we're passive. That's called the lashon of Lishas, my chazit. So we have the principle of v'chai b'hem, and then we have another principle of my chazit. Again, if you're following the logic, the terminology might be overwhelming. It doesn't matter. Don't pay too much attention unless you're big lamdan like the rabbi here, and the Kavri HaKol here, and any other great scholars here in the audience. So if you don't follow the v'chai b'hem and the my chazis, don't get scared off. I didn't mean to do that. The logic is very sound. The logic says that live for the Torah and not die for the Torah. But at the same time, there's another logical principle that halacha operates with, namely that who gives you the right to choose one life over the other?
There's also another thing there. But V'chai Bohem doesn't really take place because somebody dies. So where's the V'chai Bohem?
Okay, good. Hold on to that for just a minute.
Ein Dochen Nefesh Mipnei Nefesh.
Ein Dochen Nefesh Mipnei Nefesh. Excellent. The Mishnah in the Goyen, right? The baby's coming out of its mother's womb. Do you want to kill the baby to save the mother? What do you do? Ein Dochen Nefesh Mipnei Nefesh. Okay. So let me ask you a question. And what I'm about to present to you is the logic of the Ramach, Rav Moshe Cohen. He lived some 6 centuries ago, before the Kesef Mishnah, Rav Cairo, Rav Yosef Cairo, and he says the following. You know what? This logic of my chazis, that we can't swap one life for the other, ain't dochen nefesh b'nei nefesh, that only applies and makes sense if the person, there's no individual that's meant to die. You know, if somebody's going to die anyway, let's say, if somebody is designated for death, then that's a whole different story. Is anybody following my logic here? I'm presenting to you the approach of Rav Moshe Cohen, the Ramach. The Ramach says that if you're deciding, you're weighing one life over the other, save this one and give up this one, who gives you the right? Ain't dochen, they're all equal in the eyes of Almighty God. You don't have the right to do that and make that decision, kill someone for the sake of saving yourself or anybody else. But supposing the circumstances are such that in the act of giving up a life, you're giving up a life that's destined to die anyway in this whole piece of this whole scenario. Can anybody think of a case? I'll give you a hint. Take a look at again the Tosefta, yeah?
Transplantation.
Okay, that's too sophisticated for me because that'll take another 3 hours, and I know you guys want to get home at some decent hour. But in the Tosefta that we're dealing with, again, let's go over the Tosefta. They surround the city. They say, give me one person, choose one person from the city, and if not, we destroy the whole city.
But if they ask for specific...
Okay, hold on, Rabbi, you're giving up my whole shit. Yeah, give me a minute. No, that's okay. So, before we get to what the rabbi said very beautifully, that's called Yichdu, which is going to be the Kesef Mishnah's argument against the Ramach. First, let's understand the Ramach. Says the Ramach, Rav Moshe Cohen. He says, in this case, what's going to happen if we don't choose one member of the city as they're demanding? If we don't comply with their demands, everybody's going to die, including that person that we want to give in. So what if you gain 0? Says the Ramach, if there was some pasuk in Chumash, some verse from which you derive that no, under no circumstances can you give up a life that's terrible, that's shfichus damim, you're shedding blood, you're violating murder. You can't do that even for the sake of pikuach nefesh. There's no v'chai b'hem, like we said by Avodah Zarah. Fine, but that's not what's going on over here. The Gemara doesn't have any verse from which it derives the conclusion that you can't touch lo tirtzach. On the contrary, the Gemara wanted to allow you to kill someone to save your life. But the Gemara says we can't do that. Why? Because of my chazis, who chooses one life over the other? But if he's going to die anyway, so what sense is it? You're going to choose one person and throw him to the dogs. But that person is anyway doomed. He's destined to die because the Ma'anis is threatening to raise the entire city to the ground. Therefore, says the Ramach, I don't begin to understand this Tosefta. The logic of the Tosefta is very, very challenging. You can't choose one person. What's going to happen to that one person? Great, you didn't choose him. You didn't submit him. He's going to die anyway, together with the entire city. Where's the logic of my causes in this? Having done justice to the Ramah, let's try to do justice to the Tosefta. I do feel committed to understand the Ramah, and I hope we've done a good job in explaining his position. But we're left with the Tosefta. We're left with the Rambam. So now I'm going to present the argument of the Kesef Mishnah. Says the Kesef Mishnah, no. You're missing the most important principle. The problem is Yichdu, as the rabbi said before. What's Yichdu? According to the Kesef Mishnah, the principle that the Tosefta is establishing is in no way contradictory to our original scenario that we discussed, where you're being threatened, if you don't kill him, we'll kill you. The scenario of the Gemara in Pesach and in Sanhedrin. Why? Says the Kesef Mishnah, in the case of the Tosefta, the real problem, the underlying principle of the Tosefta is random selection. Selection is something, and I hate to use that word because it has such connotations, but I can't think of a better word, and maybe dafka because of those connotations it's very relevant in this context. This is abhorrent in the eyes of the Halakha. The Tosefta is breaking new ground, introducing a brand new principle. We have no right to go through the process of selection. Logically, perhaps for the Ramach, makes a lot of sense. We can't necessarily neutralize the power of his logic. But there's a new principle. In the case where you have to kill him in order to save yourself, there's no process of selection. The Ma'anes, the one who's forcing you, has already chosen that individual. And therefore the logic before my chazis, before the principle of Ein Dochen, we cannot choose one nefesh over the other, was, yes, commit murder. Why? For the sake of Pikuach Nefesh B'Chai. B'Chai applies to 612 out of 613. That was the logic of the Gemara in Pesach and the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Until the Gemara says, no, my chazis, you can't do. That logic would justify killing someone who's been designated for the sake of saving your own life. That logic is very powerful. And it does not in any way contradict the Tosefta. The Tosefta is 100% correct. Because the Tosefta is not talking about someone who's been designated. In fact, the Tosefta goes ahead and says, if they, the Ma'anes, designated a certain individual, again, it's machlokas here between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. If we had another hour, we'd get into that. We don't have the time. But suffice it to say, in a very simplistic sense, if the Ma'anis designated one person, you don't have to go through the selection process. Give that individual up. Yes, we will embrace the logic of the Ramach, that for the sake of saving the rest of the city, and this guy's going to die anyway, he's already been chosen, he's been designated, we don't have to go through the selection process.
What if somebody volunteers?
Then we don't have to go through the selection process. Then even according to the Kesef Mishnah, it makes sense. I mean, the Kesef Mishnah is saying, let's protect the Tosefta. And as a general rule, we're not allowed to give up one life. The Ramach doesn't even understand the Tosefta. But even according to the Kesef Mishnah, if there's not a random selection, Gerald, I would even ask the following question. Suppose, we draw straws. You get the one who gets the smallest straw is the one who's going to go. I don't know. This has to be analyzed very carefully. Let's come full swing back to our discussion about Arab terrorists. They demand the release of terrorists from jail. Those terrorists are no doubt going to come back to try to, Hashem should protect, to try to kill men, women, and children. Do we have the right to go in to prisons, free terrorists from jail, expose unknown numbers of innocent Jews to death at the hands of terrorists for the sake of saving those? Just like the Tosefta says that we can't select someone to die in order to save someone else. In the case of hostages, we want to save the hostages. It's not chas v'shalom that we're trying to be cruel and insensitive. We feel tremendously and we identify with the hostages that are going to be killed. But at the same time, who gives us a right to let others die for the sake of Pikuach Nefesh to save those hostages? Anybody want to slug me up?
We got a Vadai and a Shema here. You said the hostages, that's a Vadai.
Excellent.
The hostages.
Excellent. What else? I'll look for another slugger. Again, what we're studying here is the Tosefta relevant? Is it a parallel, identical scenario to what we're discussing?
No.
Why?
Because they're not saying they're going to kill everybody else.
They should kill you.
No, they're not saying.
Who's they? I mean, just so who's not saying? Just so I know who.
In the case
terrorists
of
are not saying, or we're not saying. Who's not saying?
The terrorists are not declaring. If you not release, if you release them, then they're gonna kill someone else. That we assume that they're gonna kill someone else.
Okay, sharpen it just a little bit more. We're going to assume, but we're not doing what? Again, what was my key word over here in the Tosefta? What underlies the Tosefta? Selection, correct? Are we selecting? Rosenwald? Did I get that right? Okay, we'll try to learn that because I never heard that. I heard many Rosenwald, but not Rosenwald. Mr. Rosenwald, Dr. Rosenwald, Rabbi Rosenwald. Mr. Rosenwald. Okay. Mordechai. Mordechai says very well. First of all, who says that the terrorists that we free from jails are going to definitely succeed in their terrible missions? And secondly, we're not selecting anyone to die. And thirdly, I want to add my own. To submit some Jew, to choose a Jew in the scenario of the Tosefta, and give him over for the express purpose, the declared purpose of being killed. That's what they're asking for. We'll know what to do with him. That's tantamount to an act of murder. It's not direct murder, but it's indirect. What's the status of indirect murder? Take a look in the Rambam. This I have for you towards the bottom of your page, page 1. And the Rambam has all sorts of scenarios of indirect murder. Mafioso style, you hire a killer. Shalach Avadav, you send your slaves, your servants to kill him. You tie someone up on a railroad track in front of a lion. All these cases of indirect murder, says the Rambam, Kol echem shofech damim hu v'avon hariga v'yoda v'chayev misa. The Rambam is absolutely clear. The Rambam is committed to the position that even causing someone's death is an act of murder. Therefore, for us to say, well, let's choose one member of our community and give him over, submit him to be killed by the Ma'aniks in order to save the city, that's an act of murder. That we cannot do. It's a selection process. It's an act of murder. Avon hariga biyod. But to free Arab terrorists from prisons, how would you construct an act of murder? Where's the shvichas damim? Is it definite? Is it immediate? Have we selected anyone? Where's the ichdu? And on top of it all, it's not an act of murder even in the grama sense. Grama, when we say you've caused murder, you've caused murder to so-and-so, you know exactly how tying him up on a railroad track is going to lead to his inevitable death. But in this case, and here I want to go a step further, to free terrorists from Israeli jails, is that called putting a Jew's life in danger? And here I have to quote you the landmark, famous tshuva of the Noda B'Yehuda with regard to autopsies. Are there any physicians here in the audience by any chance? Yeah? Have you ever heard of this tshuva of the Noda B'Yehuda? The question is, medical students study cadavers, correct? I mean, if you take anatomy, you can't do without it. They're trying to produce, what do they call them? Plastic. What do they call them? Plastic organs, or I don't know what. I need a better word for that. Artificial organs, and it just doesn't cut the mustard.
Well,
right?
Actually, it's not the case. In fact, most medical schools in Canada don't use human cadavers.
You're kidding? Okay, so I'm way off the chart here. My son is in medical school in New York. And I don't want to tell you how many cadavers he cut up. Anyway, we won't go into it because that's even more gory than the story we're talking about with the terrorists. Okay. But the point is that this was a big issue way back at the time of the Noda B'Yehuda, 2.5-3 centuries ago, back in Czechoslovakia and Prague, and the Noda B'Yehuda was faced with the following question. Somebody came down with a very, very rare disease. Another individual had come up with that disease and had perished. And the question was, would it be permissible to do a dissection in order to determine the cause and possibly come up with a cure that could save someone else? And then Rav Yehuda's famous answer was, it's pikuach nefesh lifanenu, says the Rav Yehuda. We have a chola, we have someone now who's suffering from that disease. But, says the Rav Yehuda, to allow cadavers to be cut up, which is a violation of about 3 different averos, I won't go into it now, for the sake that somebody in 100 years from now or 200 years from now might contract that same rare disease, says the Rav Yehuda, and I'm not going to tell you everyone agrees with the Rav Yehuda, but it's a really landmark, all the posts can have to deal with this Rav Yehuda. He says that's not called pikuach nefesh. That doesn't override. In other words, pikuach nefesh has to be immediate, has to be real. Again, statistically, perhaps, if you could predict that this is going to be a commonplace thing, we have to study, we have to know. Maybe in the case of medical students, again, not in Canada, but at least in the States today as things are, Canada's more advanced than the United States. We know this from the Olympics. And so therefore we have to, we're trailing behind. Maybe I should apply for citizenship here. I have U.S. citizenship. I don't know. Are there any U.S. citizens here, or I'm the only one? Okay, I won't even ask that question.
But if you release terrorists, it's a vada. They're going to kill people.
Oh, so that you'll have to debate with Mr. Rosenwald. He just left, so you'll have to catch him. We can't, aim done and on of shalom b'fan. Yavel bal shara v'yav bal shara. So when he comes back, you'll fight that out whether it's a vade or something. But what I will tell you is, it's not immediate. It's down the line. We have to protect with our security forces the possibility of these terrorists coming back to haunt.
Shiur does that apply to God? Very simple question.
If you think that's simple.
No.
You think that's simple? If my friend, may rest in peace, Meir Kahana was here, he would not tell you that that's a simple question.
I'm asking in a different way. I'm asking in a different way. Because what I'm saying is then, there's no reason why Israel shouldn't have the death penalty. Therefore, we're going to build terrorists in the jails. There'll be nothing to negotiate.
You're right. That's a good idea. I think I would... I vote for the right, so I'm puzzled trade over here. You know what I'm saying? But, I never try to impose my political views on anyone else. Yes. How are you?
As the popular idiom says, bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. You have to prepare fear. But it's not a vada that prepares for good or the hospital.
Okay, it's not vada, you're not selecting anyone for death, it's down the line, it's not immediate, we have protection, we have our Kodesh Baruch, we have our own security forces, we have to improve them, etc., etc., etc. So I'm really tending to move towards the following conclusion. The Tosefta. And again, I'm really fighting a lot of the posting here, but the Tosefta, I don't think, is an accurate analogy to our scenario of terrorism. To say that we can't choose someone, that's the Tosefta, we can't choose someone to die on the altar of the sacrifice for the sake even of the many. That I understand, the shvichas damim involved here. But to free terrorists, even if you convince me that they'll succeed down the line, chas v'shalom, I don't know, I don't think that that's an act of shvichas damim. I don't think we can talk about that situation of pikuach nefesh for their future attacks when they come back and compare that to the immediate real pikuach nefesh of the hostages. And therefore I tend to think that the Tosefta here is not applicable. And in the case of Entebbe, when Rav Ovadia Yosef, the Sephardi chief rabbi at that time, told Yitzhak Rabin that he should send in Israeli soldiers, as we did in Baruch Hashem, we were zocheh to see an unbelievable nitzachon, a victory. Rav Ovadia Yosef only justified that under the law of milchama, of war. He claims, Rav Ovadia Yosef, we are at war against terrorism. That changes the whole picture, as I indicated at the beginning. But be that as it may, which is another shiur unto itself, and in Mirz Hashem, maybe we'll have a chance for that, an opportunity to discuss that. Leaving aside that element, that shikul, that element of this discussion, that this is a war against terrorism, with all the laws of milchama, in which we put soldiers' lives in danger for the sake of fighting a battle. Leaving that aside, if you're talking just in terms of saving hostages, I believe that the Tosefta would not be ample justification to prohibit us from making that swap. And I'll tell you more than that. And here I want to raise a very, very fundamental question, and that is, does the state of Israel have any halachic status We know that there's something called a Melech B'Yisrael. A king in Israel has unbelievable powers, almost limitless. He can decide what to do. Does the state of Israel have those halachic powers of a Melech?
Yes.
Says Rav Kook, do you have the piece that you didn't get it?
You learned from the Hashmonaim.
Oh, from the Chashmonaim, excellent.
They had no right to be Melech.
You saw the truth from Rav Kook?
No.
So you could have written it.
But they functioned with din. They had a din Melech. So the same thing, any Melucha that Klal Yisrael accepts as a legitimate Melucha has a din Melech.
Beautiful. I underlined it in the truth of Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of Palestine. You'll see it there on the second page. Rav Kook claims that there's a halachic status called a shofet, who has powers of Melucha. He's not a gavra of Melech. There are many mitzvahs that apply to Melech, wouldn't apply to a shofet, but he does have political control. And therefore, if the political state of Israel, as a representative of the Jewish community in the state, is halachically significant, has a status at least of Dinei Melucha, Taksisei Melucha, of a shofet, then certainly the state would have every right, halachically, to decide that if we want to negotiate with terrorists, which I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but that's a political decision that the Malchus has to make, but we should negotiate with them just simply to save the hostages. Imagine again, Chas v'Sholom, if this would have gone beyond the proportions that we're dealing with. How many people died in Malot? How many children? I don't remember the number. 36 was it? Yeah, that's massive. But supposing, God forbid, that the terrorists would take over who knows what, and let's say they would take over an army base. Chas v'Sholom. I did my service very often in Mitzpei Ramon. It's the largest Air Force base in the Middle East. If somehow so what we're going to say? We're not going to negotiate with terrorists? That would be a political consideration for the state of Israel to make at any particular moment in time, based on this truth of Rav Kook, that recognizes the authority of the state of Israel as a political entity that can make decisions that are recognized by halakha under the law of shofet. I just want to conclude, because I know my time is running out. It's Yom HaZicharon tonight in Israel. It's probably already getting close to Yom HaZicharon. But the day after Yom HaZicharon is Yom HaTzmaut. For me, it's a very strange Yom HaTzmaut, because as a result of the fact that they pushed it off, it's the 6th of Iyar, which is the yahrzeit for my father. So I have to somehow integrate those two experiences. But take a look at the Gemara in Ketubot, and with this I'll let you go. This is on the bottom of page 2. The Gemara tells us, and I summarized it in English. Actually, it's the bottom of page 1, and I summarized it in English on the bottom of page 2. The Gemara tells us about the love of Eretz Yisrael, of the Tanoim and the Amoraim, and what they did when they first landed in Eretz Yisrael. Reb Chia bar Gamda, the Gemara tells us, when he got to the shores of Israel, probably around Akko, around up there in the north, Migander bi'afra, he wallowed in the dust of Eretz Yisrael. Shenemar, because the pasuk says in Tehillim, Ki rotzu avadecha es avoneha v'yasafar yechonon. Your servants, O God, love and cherish the stones and the ofar and the very ground and the soil of Eretz Yisrael. Says Rashi, Ki rotzu avadecha es avoneha v'yasafar yechonon. What is Rashi adding over this? So sometimes Rashi reiterates the Gemara to tell you that you have the right text, the Girsa, Yesh Garsa. But here it's a pasuk in Tehillim. So my father, may rest in peace, said the following. I think it's a beautiful idea. Sometimes, it's rare, that Rashi, instead of adding to the Gemara, subtracts from it. Rashi sensed that if we read the text of the Gemara as it is, we might make one error. We might misunderstand something. Which word does Rashi omit? Shenem. Reb Chia bar Gamda arrived at the shores of Eretz Yisrael, and he opened up a pasuk in Tehillim, and it says, Ki rotzu avadecha savoneha. So he got down and he kissed the ground of Eretz Yisrael. He wallowed in its dust. Says Rashi, no. It's not the Shenem. Leave out the word Shenem. Ki rotzu avadecha savoneha. Because your servants crave, they desire, they love the stones and the earth of Eretz Yisrael. It's got to come from the heart. It's got to be existential. And so you talk to people about Aliyah, and I know that's a hot topic, very debatable one, especially here in wonderful Canada, where they don't even do autopsies in medical schools. And it's great here. I mean, I find it a little expensive. I don't know, maybe... I walk out of the grocery or supermarket and like $100 and something bucks for a couple of pieces of fruit. But okay, whatever it is. But it's wonderful. Gullus is great, and I have a job here, and I'm committed here, and who knows what I'm going to do in Israel. So I always tell my students, you want a halachic license for living in Chutz La'aretz, some sort of heter as we call it, come to me, we'll discuss it. I'll find you many. But that's not what it's all about. What it's about is ki ratzu avadecha savaneho. One comes to Eretz Yisrael and it's challenging. Niknes b'Yisur. But if it's that craving that comes from within. So as we approach Yom HaZicharon, Yom HaTzma'ut, may it be His will that we should all experience like Rav Chia Bar Gamda of old, ki ratzu avadecha savaneho, to cherish the very stones of Eretz Yisrael. The offer, which unfortunately is machaper every tragic loss for the sake of Israel of today. And with that love, Emir Hashem, we'll bring all the Jews together at the time of Kibbutz Galuyot. Then we'll have a Sanhedrin to decide all these issues of life and death. We'll rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. Thanks everyone for that.